Okay, comrades, you're all welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. Unfortunately, up to this point, our main speaker, Steve Headley, can't get to the meeting, so hopefully he'll attend. We'll notice his presence shortly. But in the meantime, we've decided to go ahead with a discussion about the rise of the right in Britain and also the way in which the right wing is being combated on the streets. There were massive demonstrations in a number of English cities in August. So even though the right wing is mobilising, such as the attacks in Yorkshire and the fire in the hotel that was designed or designated for asylum seekers, there is resistance. And because we're an international tendency, there's a huge threat across the globe now from the rise of the right wing. The most recent elections in Thuringia and Saxony in Germany show the strength of the right. Now, these are smallish states, but nonetheless, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, is gaining influence right across Germany, and their influence in the next federal elections will be significant. Comrades are also familiar, of course, with Le Pen in France and the rise of her national rally. Meloni and the Brothers of Italy are in power in Italy. The right wing is strong in several countries, Holland and Hungary, countries such as that. So in Britain, there's several right-wing groups. In England, there's several right-wing groups. The most, I suppose, immediately present and dominant is the English Defence League, which is the group led by Tommy Robinson, which isn't his real name at all. He's actually Lennon, but he's changed his name to a more football, hooligan-friendly nomenclature, Tommy Robinson. But there have been, over a number of years, many right-wing groups in Britain. The National Front, the British National Party. Some groups have been openly fascist. It goes right back to the time of Mosley with the British Union of Fascists, which is quite a strong fascist organisation at the time. I was surprised to learn in recent times that they were very strong also for a period following the war. Mosley's fascist organisation. So there's a history there that we can have a look at and see its impact. We also need to have a look during the course of the meeting at Nigel Farage and the influence of his so-called Reform Party. Because even though they wouldn't see themselves as part of, say, the same group that Tommy Robinson and his allies are working around, nonetheless, Farage and his organisation poses a real threat to the organised labour movement. But as we combat them on the streets, and as the trade union movement needs to come to terms with the growth of fascism, of left, right-wing and fascist organisations, we've also had considerable victories. Comrades will remember some of the names from the past, names like Colin Jordan, and he's dead now, but nonetheless, he was an openly fascist organiser in Britain. His organisation is gone. With other people like John Tyndall, Martin Webster, Aaron Lees, leaders of right-wing and fascist and sometimes quasi-fascist organisations, they're all gone, and their influence as the organisations they formed has gone. But it's always a threat, and the new group, the English Defence League, is something we have to come to terms with now and see how we combat it and defeat it in Britain. It's essential from the international point of view of the international working class that we defeat the rise of fascism and right-wing ideas in Britain. We also need to keep an eye on the United States because Donald Trump enables and facilitates the growth of right-wing organisations in the US. There's lots of right-wing groups emerging there, and some of them openly fascists, like there's a few of them are openly and declare themselves to be fascists. Now, unfortunately, as I said at the beginning, Steve Headley is not with us yet, and Steve is the chairman of the Newham Trades Council and also an ex-leader of the RMT. So his experience will be for us very valuable when the discussion gets underway. So what we're proposing to do is to perhaps open the discussion on the rise of the right wing in Britain. And then, as I said, there's a lot of experience here at this meeting, and comrades are free to speak on any aspect of the rise of the right they wish. And because we're an international tendency, Workers' International Network, we're also interested to hear about developments in other countries, particularly successes that the left has had in defeating the rise of fascism in the various countries. So it might be useful in terms of the structure of the meeting if somebody kind of opens a discussion briefly with some introductory points, indicate some pointers that the discussion might focus around, and following that very brief introduction, We'll then open it for discussion to the comrades in general. So who's going to volunteer to give a kind of formal opening to the discussion? Or is the few remarks I made, is that sufficient to stimulate a general talk? Any ideas there, comrades? Okay, so then maybe we'll just open the discussion then.
Finn, does Matthew and Roger have got their hands up?
Yes, okay.
You've seen that,
yes,
yeah. I
yes,
thought maybe
that's
you'd
correct.
missed it. Okay.
Yes, Pam, yes, I missed him. You're quite correct.
Okay.
Matthew, I presume, is first there, followed by Roger, followed by anybody.
Okay.
It's Matthew because he's at the top left-hand corner. So
Yeah, I've got to know,
we'll
Pam.
get you there.
That's not a matter of technology. That's my eyesight.
Right. Okay.
Matthew?
Okay. Thanks, Corey. So I just think we, of course, had an interesting demonstration yesterday in Glasgow. There were 350 odd fascists and assorted hangers on, and about 10 times as many people opposing them in George Square in Glasgow. So in those terms, you know, a success, although I was disappointed there were as many as 350. But, you know, obviously this is the sort of tail end of their mobilisation. I mean, I think there's a few points. I mean, obviously the thing about the far right in this country now is it's not actually that well organised in terms of formal organisation. I mean, there's a whole series of fascist organisations. You know, things like the NF still exists, the BNP still exists. You've got Patriotic Alternative, you've got Homeland, which split from Patriotic Alternative, your National Action, which has been banned, etc. And there's a whole, I mean, the EDL now, you know, is essentially a shell as well. So there's a whole series of these things which are all quite small. What they do have is a big online presence and a big online networks. And it's this that really allowed them to mobilise. And the thing is that, I mean, what prompts what happened at the moment, what's been happening in the last month or so, is the reform vote. I mean, reform was allowed to do, you know, basically to tear up electoral law. I mean, here in Glasgow, they stood ghost candidates. We have no idea if these people actually exist. They gave addresses somewhere in England. Certainly they gave false addresses for their agents and so on and so forth. An address in my constituency was the local hardware store at the end of the street here. You know, probable that the local hardware store had no idea what the hell was going on. You know, so I mean, they've been allowed to do that, and there's been no investigation into that, obviously. But I mean, in those terms, essentially, the rise of the far right has been promoted by the ruling class and allowed, you know, in terms of these forms of organisation. So what obviously then comes the two key events. One, of course, Robinson, Yaxley Lennon holding his big rally on the 27th of July, you know, about just over 3 weeks after the election in London, in which they succeeded in gathering at least 20,000 far-rightist stroke fascists of all sorts and flavours to fill most of Trafalgar Square in London. It's the biggest fascist far-right rally in this country in decades, from so far as I remember. If anybody else can think of a bigger one, I don't, you know, fair enough, but it's certainly the biggest one I've seen. And it's that. Then the kickoff was the kickoff for, you know, with, you know, Robinson present, and of course showing his infamous video slandering a Syrian man, which he'd been ordered by the courts not to do, and then of course fleeing the country. And again, you see the courts. I mean, you can quite clearly see the interest in the courts of promoting the far right, in that he has had an arrest warrant issued for him for breaching the court order, but it's not going to be activated until October. So he's allowed to swan around Europe and do what the hell he likes. The other thing about Robinson, of course, is he's heavily subsidised by, you know, he's lots of money. I mean, he's been subsidised by the Zionists. In particular, he's, you know, obviously got an alliance with as a fascist, with an alliance with Zionists. This is the other split that runs through the far right, or the fascists. There's the major branch of the fascists actually have an alliance with the Zionists, as did the Nazis, of course, as Tony Greenstein pointed out in his useful book on the question. There is another section, a smaller section of the fascists that just hates all Jews. and there is that sort of rumbling dispute between the two. But the fact that Zionists have subsidised, of course, these anti-Semitic fascists, and coming out of that meeting, that big rally on the 27th, of course, was then the murders in Southport, and the fake rumours that were put around that the guy who committed these stabbings was either a Muslim and or somebody who'd come across the channel on a boat, neither of which, of course, is true. In fact, actually, some of that rumour was promoted from a channel that was it Channel 3, based in Pakistan. I mean, it's incredible, in terms of the international nature of some of this, and the ridiculous nature of it. And obviously, based on that, then they're able to get these to get these rallies in various parts of the country, some of which were opposed and some of which weren't. But obviously, their intent, of course, is to do as much damage as possible, either attacking mosques or attacking the hotels housing asylum seekers, and in an effort, obviously, to kill people as well. But this has been snuffed out basically by the opposition on the street, in terms of a mass turnout in numerous places, whether that's London or Birmingham or Leeds or Glasgow or Brighton or wherever else, that actually we've seen this mass turnout from the left and from the community and from the Palestine movement against these people. And of course, obviously, the other thing, of course, is the efforts by the cops to jail large numbers of people, in Starmer's effort to say he's doing something, and the rest of it by jailing people. Of course, the interesting thing is that the ruling class has no intention of actually inquiring as to why this happened. I mean, in previous riots, we've actually had inquiries. In this one, you suspect that we'll have none, because obviously they don't want to ask the question. So I'll leave it there, and I'll let Roger say what he's got to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Roger, you're next. You're muted, Roger.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Actually, if any other comrade would like to speak first, I put my hand up at the beginning because I'm willing to kind of make my point. But if there are other comrades who would like to speak first, you're very welcome.
Yeah, you're okay, Roger. Just continue.
No?
Yeah.
Well, okay, comrades. So just a few disjointed points that I would have, I was thinking I'd come into the discussion later. But look, it's obvious that there's been a complete change in the whole stance and political character of the ruling class worldwide, and most notably in Europe, which was always, up until fairly recently, that was kind of bastion of a sort of liberal, enlightened capitalist regime. And that's been completely abandoned, partly, I think, because of the increasingly bitter and deep-rooted crisis in society, not only economically but in every other way too, but also partly because it represents, especially in Britain, a kind of collapse of the old establishment and the rise to the top of almost of a criminal class, of a criminal class of black marketeers and spivs and speculators and so on. And it's a kind of political reflection of that. But we do see all over Europe, even in the more economically stable countries. You see in Germany the rise of the AfD. We see in Spain the rise of what's the name of the party again? Oh, it's slipped my mind. And of course, they're still not in power in those countries, but in most of the countries of Europe now, we see that they're supporting, they're either leading a government or at least they're partners in a coalition, including something which would have been unthinkable a few years ago, Italy, which had the strongest communist party outside of the Stalinist bloc, before, and where we see led by openly by a party which has open fascist antecedents and a background. There's even an MP in the Italian Parliament with the surname Mussolini, the grandson, I think, of Mussolini. Even in Sweden, which was a kind of mecca of social democracy, we see that they're part of the ruling coalition now, an openly fascist party. Anyway, I don't need to give more examples. And then, of course, further afield, of course, in most of the in many countries in Latin America, in many countries in Asia, and of course the if Trump comes to power again, then that there's definitely an openly, overtly fascist wing of his supporters. But what does it mean? Does this mean that the opportunity is lost, so that once again Europe is sliding, or the world is sliding back towards the horrors of the 30s? I think we've seen in discussions recently, including on this forum, we've seen two sort of contradictory things, both in my opinion. Um, it's possible to go too far in both directions. There's one direction which says, or one interpretation which says, these groups are not fascist anymore. They're ex-fascist. But we had a comrade from France recently who was talking in those terms in relation to Le Pen, and saying, look, Le Pen was never, even Le Pen Senior was never really a proper fascist, and now it's, I won't repeat all the points that were made. A lot of the comrades were there, and made points which I think were underestimating the threats and underestimating the danger. On the other hand, we do see, I don't think we've had it sort of expressed in our meetings, but we do often come across people who are in despair, who hang their heads and say, well, the opportunity is gone. The working class was not able to seize the opportunity when it was more in the ascendant, maybe in the 70s, and that the situation is almost out of our control now, and that we're hurtling towards world war and so on. Now, it is also a fact, by the way, that the ruling class internationally is beginning to talk in terms of a new world war. And I think, for instance, the differences expressed in the USA between the Democrats and the Trumpite Republicans, it represents a kind of two different tactical approaches to that. I think that the position of the Democrats, of Biden and of Harris, is that we have to stop Russia now at all costs, and even prepare for war with Russia, because we're looming ahead is a confrontation with China, and the danger is that China has a very unstable and nuclear armed ally in Russia, and therefore we should knock that threat out of the way before the road is open for a war with China. On the other hand, I think the attitude of the Trumpites is because of recognizing the same scenario, but the tactics would be to try to win over Russia to the side of America and to neutralize it by making a deal in relation to Ukraine and other outstanding issues. So, in any case, the threat of of a return to some of the horrors of the 30s and 40s is certainly not something to be shrugged aside. But I think what we also see is a very big difference, that all these fascist organizations, I think they are fascist, even if some of them try to mask themselves with a milder kind of visage. But I think that the main thing is that none of them at this stage have come to power and or even have posed a serious and credible threat of coming to power on the basis of street armies and a smashing of the organisations of the working class. We saw, for instance, in Britain, I mean, it was scary to see the sudden outburst of the mobs in the anti-immigrant riots that took place last month. But we also saw how actually overnight that it took just almost without preparation, almost without anything except the social media, without any political lead. Certainly, we saw this massive wave of crowds on the streets who were there, which immediately sent them skittering and skeltering to their back to their boat holes and so on. That they could put a complete end to that for the moment, to that wave of attacks on immigrant centres and so on. So we saw that they don't have the street fighting capacity. It's not like it's true that both Mussolini and Hitler came to power technically by constitutional and legal means, but that's only really very superficial, because the fact is both Mussolini and Hitler came to power on the basis almost of civil war on the streets, of a mass intimidation, and mass murders of trade unionists and trade union activists and so on, and street fighting over a prolonged period. And it was a real battle. There was almost civil war in the early 20s, or in the late teens and 1920 in Italy. There was 15 years of revolution and counter-revolution, and new revolutionary upheavals and new counter-revolutionary defeats in Germany, from the 1918 revolution to the final defeat of the working class in 1933 and so on. We don't see anything like that. We've seen that of the right-wing demagogues who come to power in various countries in the recent period, we've seen actually how weak and unstable they are. Bolsonaro has gone. Modi, who thought that he would get an overall majority, get a two-thirds majority and impose a Hindu constitution, actually lost his majority in parliament and is now dependent on very fractious and fragile and undependable allies, and probably won't last in power for his full term. And we've seen in Poland as well, the Polish regime again was defeated electorally. And I think what we'll see is, even if, say, Le Pen comes to power, which seems likely in France, and so there's a right-wing coalition, including the AfD, coming to power, perhaps in Germany, and of course all the other regimes that are there now. I do think they're very unstable, and I think they're not the last word. What these represent is a deadly warning to the working class, so they'd better prepare, because they've not been defeated yet, but they'd better be ready, because a deadly threat looms ahead of them. And I think that's the way that we ought to look at it. So I'll leave it at that comment.
Thanks, Roger. Darren, you've indicated to speak next.
Sorry, I was just finding the unmute button. Took me a moment or so. I think, it's been touched upon already about the response from the left, and the response from the left was great, and it scored an initial victory in against the riotous uprising that was triggered by the far right. But I think there's quite a discussion to be had, because I think we've seen it time and again where the left will have these anti-fascist groups, and we all know that the SWP will, as they did this time and on previous occasions, will print the anti 10,000 placards in their little factory in East London somewhere, and that's great. People mobilise that way, but I think that's always just with a message of, stop racism, migrants welcome here, etc. Again, which we all broadly support, but in the long run, we know that what is key is building a socialist opposition to fascism, to the far right. The far right are feeding off um, the same sense of inequality, the same sense of unhappiness, despair, rage that that we reflect as socialists and as Marxists. Obviously, they're expressing it in a far different way and with far different solutions, and they're diagnosing a different um, set of problems. And everything is the fault of untrammeled immigration, and a bit of woke culture thrown in, and that's their analysis. Whereas obviously our analysis is the structural failures of capitalism, which has led to mass inequality, destruction of public services, etc., etc. Now, the key for us is to build a new party and build a mass party as an alternative. Now, I mean, we've seen what happened during the Corbyn years, and we've seen that largely the um, the disappointing outcome of the of of that pro Corbyn movement, that somewhere in the region of 250,000 or more people joined the Labour Party, and have subsequently left because of the betrayal of their ideals at the hands of the right wing of the Labour Party, but have been unable to, um, those significant numbers, 250,000 or more, have been unable to sort of realign themselves in any independent way, and they struggle to really assert themselves as socialists within the Labour Party against the attacks of the right wing. So, we're looking here at the difficulties. I mean, where is the new party going to come from? And I think clearly, to me, there are struggles ahead. I mean, we've got there is still a significantly large movement against the war in Gaza. We know that austerity part 2 is on the way, and that will certainly re-engage the unions. It will certainly re-engage local activists. There had been something of a lull in the campaigning against austerity during the Tory years. I think that COVID probably sort of paid to, or probably slowed down a lot of that. And I think maybe just an inevitable kind of sense of defeatism. But I think that's definitely coming back. I mean, to me, I think probably, to me, I would, I look at what are the goals for us within the Marxist movement, and I think, it is in the short term, the next 18 months, it is building around what I think are inevitable struggles. Certainly, austerity is the next issue. We may, I think, in tandem with that, we may well see another sort of recurrence of the extremely encouraging strike wave that we saw in 2022, 23 in Britain. I think we will, there will be electoral struggles as well. And again, I mean, I was at the previous meeting, where we discussed this sort of new sort of patchwork, and this, there's massive changes within the electoral system. Now, I think, electoral politics is probably quite a secondary thing, but it certainly presents opportunities to us, and certainly, although it also does present opportunities to the likes of reform as well. But yeah, I think, there are big movements ahead, and I think particularly around the issue of austerity. Now, that's where we have to kind of, out of that movement, is find that new young layer of activists who are going to build that new party. Because I mean, where I live, it's like in a coastal area, which is the type of area where reform does very well. Now, council cuts and the like will inevitably open the door to reform. There's no doubt about that. They'll take seats where we live. There's that. They will appeal to sort of rekindling the good old days and bringing our country back and all of that, which is very much part of the sort of reform narrative. And so, like, we have to challenge that, and we have to challenge that through building a new party. I think just saying let's get the left together to drive the fascists off the streets. Let's speak up and oppose reform. We know obviously that is not enough. The new party, and I know I saw the attachment that was sent with the invite to this meeting, and I very much concur with that. And I think that's where we've got to kind of discuss about what a new party does and how it challenges and how it finds that space to challenge the far right and to actually provide an alternative to working class people. I'll thank you. Yeah, sorry, I'll just unmute again.
Thanks, Darren. Someone should consider that. That's a very important point that Darren is raising there about racism. It's not inherent. It's not intrinsic. It's not a human quality. It's a social construct. It arises in the conditions of shortages, austerity, and things of that nature. So it has to be fought in that way. So we need to maybe spend a bit of time looking at the program. What program do we advance to fight the fascists? And we have to demonstrate as well, that's obviously correct. We have to defend immigrant communities where they're being directly attacked. But our program must be about expanding the social services, expanding health, education, house building, provision of homes for people. So we need to focus a lot on that, about the program we need to fight them. I just give an example about Ireland. We had a meeting yesterday, an anti-racism meeting, which is quite effective. But there's sometimes some communities in Ireland that put up this slogan, Ireland is full, Roscrea is full, Cork is full. But it's worth noting that the population of Ireland in the mid-19th century was 8 million. It's now 5 million. So those who argue that Ireland is full, the figures are contrary. If you're going to a football game, the seats, it could be full. Seats are gone. So it's full. But if you're saying that all the home provision is full, it's ridiculous. You just build more. You expand the provision of housing, apartments, and homes for people. If you say it's full because we don't have enough doctors available, like in Ireland, if you contact a doctor, you'll be lucky to get a phone call back in 2 days' time. The solution to that is to appoint more doctors, to expand the medical service, expand the hospital service. So this notion that some place is full is a ridiculous concept. But anyway, maybe we should go back to some of the points that Darren raised there about what program do we advance to fight the fascists. Now, like I said, we have to defend communities as well. We're not just sitting on developing a program where immigrants are under attack. The trade union should be able to mobilise in such a way as to prevent such attacks. But what program do we focus on, and how do we build opposition and stop people being fooled by this false narrative of the right, that all these problems have all been generated by the presence of asylum seekers? That needs to be combated directly. So, Dominic, sorry, just see your hand there. If any other comment wishes to speak, just indicate. Dominic.
Yeah, sorry. Just a few points. I've just been on holiday in Ireland, and because of age and all the rest of it, we were using taxis quite a bit. And a few times you got into a discussion with taxi drivers who was going on about immigrants and so on and so forth. And so we started discussing it about what these immigrants were doing and what exactly were they up to. And it finished up, the guy was saying, yeah, there's 2 immigrants in, I think it was Galway. Oh, somewhere. No, sorry, it was around the border. Who were working in a meat factory. And at the end of the discussion, he was agreeing that these people were being exploited by the bosses, and that's what it was all about. It's a crude way of putting it. But in a taxi situation, a drive of 15 minutes. The thing is, you've got to start discussing with these people, because not all the people who are mouthing about immigrants, they're picking up what they see on the media and all the rest of it. You've got to challenge their opinions and explain to them that, firstly, that immigrants, if you like, are not scroungers, are not anything like that. My parents were immigrants in a sense. They moved from one part of the UK where they were born as UK citizens to another part of the UK. They moved from Northern Ireland to England. And the thing about immigrants is that they're the most hardworking people in the country. They're striving for their children and for the future of their families. And I think these points have got to be brought in. But the other thing I think has got to be brought in is, why is all this taking place? Why suddenly has the capitalists changed the policy of saying we're going to have the banner of fascism raised and we're going to attack the working class, or we're going to attack immigrants? Well, it's been raised because their attitude is they're going to increase the share of wealth that's created by the working class for their own pockets. And that's the basis of it. And this is all a smokescreen that they're putting up about immigrants and stirring up hatred among the working class where they can. And it's succeeding because nobody's explaining that it is a smokescreen. There is the capitalists who are causing all the problems of the world, quite honestly. If you look at climate change, you look at all the issues about, global warming, forest destruction, the whole setup of what's going on in the planet, it's down to the capitalists. And it's the same when it comes to the wealth distribution. I think it was pointed out in one of the documents that came out that 8 people have got the same wealth as the poorest half of the working class globally. If I've got those figures wrong, comrades can correct me. But that's absolutely obscene. And the obscenity of capitalism has got to be explained about the billionaires. What's his name? That fellow who changed the name of Twitter to X. He's talking about moving to Mars. Presumably his perspective for this planet's going to be like is so horrifying that Mars is going to be a comfort area for them to retreat to. I mean, it's just absolute madness that the billions they spend on that. So it's the whole question, I'm not getting it over very well, but the whole thing is the working class has got to be made aware that the assault on immigrants is an assault on the working class. It's a preparation for a real savage attack on the living standards of the workers, in this country and across the world, in Britain, in Ireland, in France. It's on a global basis. And when you consider the actual wealth that the capitalists are controlling, normally I would think, well, why do they want more? They've got everything. But they do. They want more. They don't want 4. They don't want 8 people having the wealth of half the poorest in the world. They want 4 people and then 2 people. And they're going to finish up with one capitalist, presumably. I'm maybe gambling on a bit, but it's really getting down to the working class. That this is not something about whether we support immigrants or whether whether we're racist or anti-racist. We've got to get over that we're all in the same boat. They're doing this to everybody, and that's the way we're going to be finishing up fighting these people in the future. And the main structure is not going to be the fringe groups. Just the people I saw who joined under the Corbyn banner, or that situation, unfortunately, thought all they had to do was join the Labour Party and everything would be sorted. They didn't have to do any activities. They didn't have to do any fighting. And we see what happened because there was no organisation, no structural there to defend the left in the party. And that's the situation we're going to face in the trade unions if we don't start putting over the position that this is not a separate thing from the class struggle. It's an integral part of the class struggle. Anyway, I finished there. I'm sorry, a bit rambling.
Thank you, Dominic. I see, Matthew, you've indicated again, but before I call you back, we'll get Harris, who's indicated he wants to speak. So.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna probably repeat a couple of the points that Roger mentioned and that Dominic mentioned now. Against Roger is that I think that history moves on and it doesn't always repeat in an identical way. So I don't think that in Western Europe there will be fascist mobs in the streets, like killing intellectuals. I think that the climate doesn't work like that anymore. Maybe one or two would be sufficient to scare people into the axis of the political conversation to move clearly into fascism. But most people will be like, and this is happening anyway. I mean, the discourse has moved to the right, almost with very few murders. Like if one excludes all the immigrants who die in the Channel and in southern Mediterranean, or in the Mediterranean in total, which not that many people care about, or you see countries building fences, for example. That's how it expresses itself now. I mean, so we won't see the exact same phenomena as we saw in the 30s, but the effect might be the same. Now, and to not monopolize what we're talking about, another point that Dominic made about the capitalists, it's in the same spirit that things, the underlying substance of the concepts, or of the of all the struggles, or maybe the fundamental truths of Marxism might be there, but the way they're expressed, and I think a lot of the modern left misses this point, like in the political left, is how it expresses itself. And as Dominic mentioned, our enemies at the moment should be the Elon Musks and the Bill Gateses and all of these, specifically with a name, not in abstract terms, because that's who they are. That's where the capital is now. It's with technology. It is a whole technological battle of who controls AI, for example. These are the discussions we should be having, which to a certain extent the European Union does try to harness politically, even though we don't like the European Union. So these are the conversations we need to be having. And one thing that I don't know if you notice, and I really want to express it, given that there's so many people based in the UK, is what happened, which to me it seemed massive, that Elon Musk actually went against the Prime Minister of the UK. Like, he told him there's going to be civil war is inevitable in England when the events were taking place. He actively went. So one mega rich person actually challenged maybe the number 2 capitalist country in the world, and humiliated, in a way, the prime minister of the number 2. When we think West, we think first United States, then we think England, for all of us who are outside. So, and there was a challenge by this person who feels that they've got enough power against the prime minister, just because nominally he's Labour, maybe, and he's not conservative or whatever. So to me, that was massive. That was massive. Like, no shame at all. No holding back from this unaccountable, person, which is Elon Musk. And the scariest thing is, I think there was discussions that Trump might might give him a political post. So there you go then. Fascism gets into politics through the front door. And I'll stop there for the moment.
Thanks, Horace. Now, before I call Matthew in again, are there any other comrades wishing to speak? I mean, you'll have other opportunities, but if you wanted to speak, you indicate now. Okay, Matthew, you're back.
I remember to unmute myself. Yeah, I agree with Harris. I mean, obviously things will not be the same as they were in the 20s and 30s. And you can see the form of the fascist organizations is different, and the politics is different. As of course, I mean, obviously they're not facing a mass, the parties of the Comintern or anything of that strength. I mean, it doesn't exist. To our great regret. I mean, well, apart from obviously Stalinism, but I think that and also, I mean, your point about Trump and Musk, I mean, clearly, obviously, Starmer wasn't going to take on Musk. I mean, the notion is crazy, and the idea that the British would issue an arrest warrant for Elon Musk is unbelievable. But Trump has actually offered him a job if he gets in. And then he said, well, he can go around reconstructing chunks of the federal government and the regulations of companies. So, I mean, in those terms, I mean, yes, I mean, all that's very, very frightening. And, the fact that obviously the ruling class is promoting, I mean, Trump, I mean, the people around Trump, like Bannon and Miller and so on, are actually organizing the far right and the fascists on an international basis. I mean, they're working very closely with Bolsonaro, with Orban, with Meloni, and all these people. And of course, Keir Starmer is a great mate of Meloni in Italy. The woman is a fascist. Although obviously not ruling as such. But I mean, all of this stuff is moving in that direction. And the problem, the issue that the ruling class has, of course, I mean, the crisis of capitalism in general. I mean, the crisis is getting to the point where you think we need to dream up a new word, because I mean, the crisis has been said so often, and it's getting that ridiculous that there's something that needs to be more severe than that. The other thing, of course, is the decline and fall of American imperialism, which is, of course, the system in which we all live under. That, of course, the US has controlled the world more or less since 1945, or most of the world, and of course that system is falling apart with the decline of the American economy and American power and so on, and their effort to exert to counter that by use of military force, the CIA, etc., and war. And the problem we've got, is that in this form of decline, I mean, they're increasingly using war and shattering entire countries. I mean, we've seen this in the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and then they wonder why people flee. I mean, obviously, once the imperialists start shattering entire societies, of course, numbers of people will flee. I mean, what do they expect? The other problem, of course, the imperialist and capitalism generally has, of course, is it's now about a century since they were forced to concede, universal suffrage by the Russian Revolution. I mean, they didn't want to, but they did. And they obviously then incorporated that system itself into the form of rule. And the problem now, of course, is it's breaking down. I mean, we see the government get elected in Britain at the moment with the lowest percentage, the least support of any government on record. That's what, they just they don't have a base. They have an enormous majority, but they don't have a social base. I mean, we can say the same in the US. I mean, people are correctly increasingly disillusioned with the entire functioning of the system. It's breaking down. And the point is they need some other instrument, some other method of rule, and so, I mean, capitalism itself is racist. I mean, it requires implements to split the working class by means of racism, misogyny, etc. I mean, you could posit a non-racist capitalism, but it's never existed. It's always used that. The state is racist. The media is racist. Racism is almost an official ideology. So in those terms, I mean, all of that stuff is pumped out all the time, and so therefore you would expect, sort of dregs of society is on to take it up, and so we see, but it's not alien to the capitalist class itself at all, and obviously they're happy to quite happy to use the dregs. Although interestingly enough, we see the Farage making sure to keep his distance from Tommy Robinson, because obviously the dregs have their uses, but you don't want to get too close to them in any shape or form. So in those terms, we're looking at a very serious social and political crisis for the ruling class, and what instruments does it have in order to try and solve it? Those problems, alongside the whole economic question. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Maybe before the next comrade speaks, could the comrades from the UK give us a bit more detail about what the perspectives would be? What are we facing in terms of the development of politics in Britain? The Starmer government is clearing the way for Farage and his Reform Party to grow. But what do comrades see as the developments in Britain, both locally and nationally in terms of the survival, if that's going to happen at all, of the Starmer government, and likewise the effects of the growth of the movement around Farage, plus the internal collapse of the Tory party, and the growth on the fringes at the moment of groups like the English Defence League. So could maybe the comrades in England explain a bit about perspectives, what's actually going to develop in Britain over the coming period? Darren, you've indicated again before you come in, is there any other comrade who hasn't spoken who wishes to contribute? John. Sorry, Darren, take John first.
Thanks. I have a few points to make. One is that being in India, I think that our situation in terms of characterizing the capitalist economy is not as simple. That's why we've had so many types of communist parties and so many types of socialist parties, and all of them having a very important base in different sections of the toiling peoples, working peoples, and things. So it's a bit difficult for us to talk in terms of unless we are, even today, if we talk in terms of just capitalism is not sufficient, because the nature of the relations of production has changed so much with the introduction of IT, information technology, with the dismembering of the working situation, the structure of the working factory, this, that, whatever. And we are not able to get people together, one. Two is the fascists, our proto-fascist organizations have been able to mobilize the working class much more than us. After Datta Samant, they have been able to mobilize the working class much more. Whichever other progressive forces or left forces which they have been able to mobilize, they have been in other sectors like the farmers or the people, dam affected people or slum dwellers, that kind of sections. And within this section now, given this complex, now we are finding the Modi and the kind of far right mobilization very, very strong. I mean, you won't believe it. I wonder whether you can see this. I mean, there is power within, according to Modi. Take this. In working class area, you're having the Catholics being talking about the Protestants. In India, Bombay, where we are not the majority. So my point is that there is some nature, the nature of mobilization itself is the basis of it. Unless we start getting back to the drawing board of talking about what is in the relations of productions that we have got to kind of see, which are the sections and what we can do for these sections. As unions, as workers represent, as representatives of toiling peoples, farmers, those kind of things. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Now somebody else who hasn't spoken is Joel. So Joel, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to comment probably briefly. Two of the perspectives I'm hearing, on the one hand, we're saying that we need to concentrate more on the fight against the growth of the right and fascism, on the objectives of building some kind of a party, an alternative, and the next steps, what we're going to be seeing is an austerity coming. And then on the other hand, there is the idea that we need to focus more on the strategies and the actions that we can take. And I'm not sure it's either one way or the other, because here in the United States, I do see a lot of groups that will come out to these various mobilizations for Palestine, whatever it may be, people that fly in unions. they just seem to have the explanation that we just need a workers' party and it'll be solved like that. It's very simplistic. And then on the other hand, there are those that don't even want to recognize that we need to have an alternative. But there needs to be some kind of methodology to get from one to the other. I think we would all agree on that to a certain extent. And in what I see with workers in the United States, the industry I'm in, is this issue of automation and how we deal with that. And this is a kind of austerity that's coming down, and how workers see this is very interesting. There's a lot of different convoluted ideas. I think a lot of people would be surprised. The very kind of eccentric ways that industrial workers react to things like this, thinking that there are conspiracies around. And this is something that's happening on a very large scale with automation and AI. But I got to be talking about it more probably in the coming weeks. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Joel. Now we've had two comrades who wish to speak again, Darren and then Dominic or John. So Darren, you're first.
Yeah, thank you, Finn. Yeah, I mean, some good comments there actually from John and Joel, I think, which are worth kind of leading on from in reference to what you asked, Finn, about what are the conditions in the UK. I think, you know, it's probably important to make to make the historical point that the last sort of major flowering of the last major upsurge, period where of trade union struggle it began round about just when I was born, which was a year before I was born, in fact, in 72, and kind of ended really, I mean, the miners' strike in the defeat of the big miners' strike in 85. I think it was seen as that sort of final defeat for the working class. Now, when you look, you look at the various struggles that happened in that sort of decade and a half or so. A lot of that working class is pretty much gone from Britain now. Whether you talk about coal mines or the shipyards in Glasgow on the Clyde side, whether you talk about the Dockers and the Thames and the Mersey and the Solent in my part of the UK, or the London print shops and so on and so forth. And so we have a new proletariat now. I mean, I did kind of allude to the strike wave of 22, 23, and that was one of the biggest kind of resurgences of industrial action in the UK for a long time. And it brought new forces into play. You had junior doctors, junior barristers who were in the previous generation would have been seen as quite a privileged grouping. But now those are young people who, because of the ending of free education, which was actually a program carried out early on in the administration of Tony Blair when he came to power in '97. Those young people were leaving university with debts tens of thousands of pounds, 60, 70,000 pounds. And furthermore, house prices have gone up hugely. It used to be the case that, an average house for a working person would cost them 3 times their average income. It would probably be less for a barrister or a doctor to buy a house because, their income would be higher. But there's the young doctors, young lawyers have been proletarianized. We have a different workforce as well. The factories and the mines and are gone now. But we have a different working class composition. We have a lot of people working in the public sector, a lot of people working in call centers. There's still a lot of home working is probably fragmented some of that, but certainly it still exists. I mean, I suppose the other important factor is the role of the unions. And there are, again, going back to austerity, which we've discussed. I mean, Unison, which was the union that represents local government workers, was really the union that was tasked with challenging the Tory austerity package that was announced sort of in 2010 and began sort of being rolled out in 2011. Unison is, a hugely underperforming union. I mean, it's got a right-wing leadership that forestalls struggles at every opportunity. There was a major struggle over pensions in 2011. And the union leadership nipped it in the bud. So they're problematic. You have unions like Unite, which is a very mixed union, and they've had some mixed results there. You've had, and certainly during the strike wave, there were a lot of bus drivers and in various parts of the country were going on strike, and it did seem that like one bus depot would go on strike, and that spread. So it did seem that bus drivers were in different parts of the country were following what was going on, because there were sort of sporadic outbursts of strikes. A lot of them were in Unite. Some were in RMT. I was working at a depot where they were all in the RMT, doing an auxiliary job. But and you've got the GMB unions. So we've got a bit of a patchwork of different unions. I mean, I think we've looked, most positively, I suppose, towards unions like the RMT, because there's been a tradition of militancy there, and the leadership have always been very militant. Probably similarly with a union like the PCS, which is the civil servants. So people, it's employers and job centres, passport office, driving licence, tax and revenues, etc. Sort of Department of Work and Pensions, I should say, more, not just job centres. And again, they've always had quite a militant leadership. A lot of their sections were out on strike. Again, it wasn't really a coordinated strike, and I don't know if that was just confidence. They did a lack of confidence that they didn't have the funds for to cover the sort of full strike pay for an all-out strike, for a prolonged all-out strike. But I think the unions here are a mixed bag, and I think we have to kind of appeal to union members and to apply that pressure to some of the union leaders. Some of them who are quite, they are on big salaries, and they are quite removed from day-to-day struggles of workers who are on, who are trying to get by on 21k a year. So I think there's, I hope that gives a fairly sort of broad sort of outline of, I think, some of the key sort of labour politics within this country, and some of the history too. I think there's certainly, it will be very interesting to see, like I say, because I think there's a younger generation who will get involved more and more. I think the strike wave did embolden people. It was, no coincidence that it came just as we were coming out of COVID, and also obviously after defeat of Corbyn. Like people, I think the unions had obviously, some of them had bided their time and hoped for a Corbyn government. That didn't happen. Then the lockdown happened. People were locked down for a couple of years, but then the strikes died. Then they got a public pay settlement, which kind of appeased them. Starmer's made some further, some concessions, but I think it's, the working people are certainly by no means satisfied. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be here this afternoon. I'll leave it there. So I'll go back to mute and let somebody else jump in again.
Thanks, Darren. So Pam has indicated.
Can I just say I had a phone call from Steve Headley, and he's on his way in now. Okay. Yeah,
I got that message, Roger. So when Steve arrives, we'll give him the platform. It's going to constrain the meeting because we generally finish about 6. So we can't take Steve's contribution as a kind of a opening part of the discussion. So it's a bit tricky, but we'll deal with it when Steve arrives. So in the meantime, Pam has indicated and she hasn't spoken yet.
I think
Pam.
it's possible it's John's. If John's wanting to speak, he might be ahead of me. Is it you? Is John? Have you got your hand up?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so. I'll come
Yeah,
after you then.
that's correct, Pam. That the reason I called you is because you haven't spoken previously.
No, but John hasn't
yeah,
either.
that's right, yeah. But
I'll
that
go
was the reason.
next.
That's the reason I did it. But you're quite right, yeah. John and Dominic are both on the screen. So, John.
Yes, I think the perspectives in Britain are very difficult to map out. The situation is that up till the riots in Britain, the right were very vocal and seemed to have no opposition. It reminded me of what was happening in Ireland with the anti-immigrant movement there, that they seemed to have the floor, and they, in Britain, the right had the floor. Nobody really objected to them. When the riots came, I think there was real revulsion, but the revulsion came about in a niceness way. For instance, in Southport, you had an attack on a mosque, a very serious attack on a mosque, where the people coming to that, gathering had been mobilized through social network, through the social networks. They probably came from all over the Northwest, but it gave the impression that there was an uprising in Southport, where this false accusation that the person who'd killed the 3 young girls, who'd attacked probably about 10 other young girls attending one of these dance things, holiday dance things, and the people came out the next day, not in a march of solidarity and saying this isn't Southport. No, they came out with brushes and pans and swept up the area and made it nice and clean and presentable. And they went to the mosque to say, look, this isn't Britain. They didn't come out in anger against the right wing. And that's been, in my opinion, what's happened in Britain. There have been massive counter demonstrations, but it's been almost nice, if you like. The police are seen as the people who took the brunt of the right wing, and people are seriously angry that you could see on the television people throwing scaffolding poles at police lines, and they were throwing them in such a way that they were out to injure the police. Now you've got a massive police search for rioters because they were all wearing body cameras and they were all looking to find out who was there. One senior police officer said that they'd identified that 70% of the people in these riots were actually had criminal records. Now, where he got that information from, I don't know, but I don't think he said it because it was just a made-up propaganda point. I think the police were looking and seeing that there was lots of people on those riots that were, if you like, just out to cause trouble. And you got a mixture of riots against the police and then, if you like, looting stores. And that combination of looting and rioting disgusted most, in my opinion, disgusted most people in Britain. But the answer was to be nice, to be friendly and that, and not really to march in anger. Because if we go back to the 1970s, the late 1970s, when the National Front probably were at their zenith, when they got over 100,000 votes in the Greater London elections, that you had things like the Anti-Nazi League, and that attracted a huge amount of support there. There's nothing like the Anti-Nazi League now. The trade unions, as far as I can see, are mute on the question. They're keeping politics out of it. Their Labour must wait sort of approach. And you have a situation where, if you like, what do you call him? Keir Starmer is going on a very serious offence against the Tories. They're coming out with a massive publicity campaign. Next week, it's the health service. Before that, it was the prison system and all the rest of it. Now, Keir Starmer has he's whatever they call it, suspended 6 or 7 Labour MPs. Now, one of those MPs was on the television, and she said that the wealthiest section in British society, the very wealthiest section in British society, had trebled its wealth, I think, since COVID. And the reality is that if you had a 2% wealth tax on people with £100 million in assets, that would raise £18 billion. 2% wealth tax, we'd think that's peanuts, would raise £18 billion. You could have a whole programme of reforms coming in on that basis. And if you were to seriously look at all the tax dodges and all the rest of it, you could get a lot more. But Keir Starmer has given his blessing to big business and said that he's not going to change any of the tax rules, that the Tories have made. Well, there's real weakness in the Parliamentary Labour Party. The trade union leadership are mute as far as what's going on. And these riots were serious attacks on society. And I just feel myself that there is a real need, but it has to come from the working class. And at the moment, the leadership of the working class are being mute. And what you're getting is people being nice, coming out if there's been windows smashed with shovels and brushes and cleaning up. And, instead of real anger, that these people who rioted were, some of them were misguided, but most of them, I think, were criminal elements who wanted to seriously, smash up British society. I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thanks, John. Pam, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, okay. Sort of following on about Keir Starmer, really, it's very hard at times I find to work out what Keir Starmer's actually up to, whether he's crazy or what, really. I mean, this latest attack on pensioners, on taking away winter fuel payments, and on changing the triple lock, and even I actually live in social housing myself, and they're even talking about bringing in a charge on social housing now to pay for new social housing. They're asking pensioners to pay for that. It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, so I think Starmer is the best friend of the right at the moment. There's absolutely no way forward offered that is of any help at all to working class people, and I think he's extremely dangerous, and he could well help help reform gain more and more power. Just on the right themselves, from my own observations, when the right have been out on the streets, which they have been a few times lately, following the Southport attacks, they were always very heavily outnumbered by the left in every case, and that is reassuring. What was the other point I was going to make? Oh, I was just going to say, just talking to people casually, I think a lot of people support reform not because they are ardent fascists, but because they're frightened and confused, and that's because of the sand that's being kicked up into people's faces, that people actually believe that a few people coming off a boat, a few refugees arriving off a boat, some overnight, have been responsible for all the British economy's woes. And then people actually believe that because they really don't know what the answer is. So the answer, I think, is that we've got to start forming a new working class party. So I just wanted to mention Campaign for a Mass Working Class Party, which has been backed by a number of Win comrades and some other people on the left. The idea is to form a new grassroots organisation. So it's not a regurgitation of all the existing left sectarian groups that have done nothing but bicker for years. and now can't even agree not to stand against each other's candidates in the elections. I'm thinking particularly of George Galloway, who is a real liability. So I just wanted to tell comrades about it, really. I put a link to our webpage into the chat, and if anybody here isn't involved and would like to be involved, please let us know. I think that's about it.
Thanks, Pam. No, we're still waiting to hear from Steve, but in the meantime, any comrade who hasn't spoken already, there's an opportunity now to either make new points or develop points that have been. Jimmy?
Yeah, and I just want to follow on some of the last comrades. One of the dangers arising from reaction in Britain is that there was undoubtedly the most serious rioting of a generation or more. And the response has been to use the police to record who was active and then to track them down. And this is parallel to the response of the police force in Ireland, where they had massive sectarian and anti-migrant demonstrations responded to by the police using police methods: search, identify, and arrest. And the big problem that follows that is that the response of the British has been, with political and with media endorsement, to ensure that those convicted were first of all convicted and then sentenced with massive sentences, compared with if a guy went out and got drunk and did a bit of wrecking, or even if there was a street melee, you could expect a couple of years or a couple of months sentences. These are now decades, like 9-year sentences for one guy this week. Now, the danger of those sort of sentences is that, first of all, the sentences are tending to be imposed on working class people. And the danger is that they're going to make these people who are skangers, who are troublemakers, who are professional enemies of the same working class, but make them into victims. They could win support because of the serious, or what would be perceived as a serious attack on working class people through the sentencing itself. The second thing is that the use of the police and the use of the courts has a tendency, where you have a weak union leadership, to even further mute the response of the trade unions, and in connection with that, mute the left and the working class organisations, because the attitude will be, leave it to the police, they'll sort it out, leave it to the courts, they'll sort it out. And the problem there is that when round 2, round 3 and round 4 come, the working class won't have the confidence in their own organisations, they won't have the experience in their own organisations, and they will be weakened in their response, which will effectively have the sense of strength and the right. One other thing that I just wanted to just comment on as an observation is that in the riots in Britain, in the riots in Ireland, and in some of the other European and American riots, there's a pattern, a very distinct pattern of behaviour by the right, by the use of the multimedia, of the internet, the online stuff, by the organisation and presentation of individuals as leaders, but not getting involved, not getting their hands dirty, getting other people to do the work. But also there has been the expenditure and organisation and successes, and we have to acknowledge that. They've had successes electorally. In Ireland, they had reasonably good successes for brand new parties in both European and in the local elections, where you had one guy whose motto was, now it's time to go for the guns. And that guy got a couple of thousand votes. Another guy who struts around in fascist and Hitlerite uniforms, he got about 4,000 votes, and his wife got another 2,000 sympathy votes. So there's all these things going on in the background. But the question that runs with them is, where the hell is the money coming from? Who is financing them? And is the being coordinated internationally, multinationally? This is the type of question that I ask again, and I can't. Like, I could see big money coming from America. I could see big money coming from Russia. I could see big money coming from individuals. But whether it's coordinated and whether it's part of an international plan, a scheme, a plot, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear any comments on that particular aspect of it.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm not sure what's the best way to proceed. As soon as Steve comes in, obviously he can speak then, but it looks like he'll be the final speaker. So the discussion is back to front. So we've had the discussion first and then the main speaker. That's the way the meeting seems to be panning out. But for now, comrades are free to speak, particularly those who haven't spoken previously. So who wants to speak next? Many questions have been raised, the people I want the developer to speak about. Yeah. Is your hand up again there, John? Sorry, Roger.
Steve has just arrived.
Yes, just about to say that. I think one of the Burns had the hand up, Finn. I don't know if anybody else did. Oh, it's Dominic, right? Sorry, I've seen him.
Yeah, I know, but the fact that Steve has come.
Hello.
Yeah, Steve, first of all, you're welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, the meeting is a bit back to front. We started at 4 o'clock, so we've had a long discussion about the vote. Yeah, I know, I'm sure there's a very good reason for it, but we had a discussion, which is very wide-ranging and very informative. And now we have the principal speaker, which is Steve, who's the chairman of Newham Trades Council. You're very welcome, Steve, to the meeting. I am myself president of the Dublin Trades Council, so we have a lot in common there.
Excellent,
so,
excellent.
Nice to see you, Steve. So you're very welcome to the meeting, and also because of your involvement in the rail workers, the RMT union, you'd have a lot to contribute. But as I said, the structure of the meeting is a bit back to front. So your contribution, depending on how long you take, will be one of the final contributions, because the discussion is taking place in advance. But you're very welcome to the meeting, Steve, and we're very happy to have you addressing this meeting of Workers International Network. So.
Okay, well, look, thanks. The reason I am very late is that I've got 3 days work. I'm currently kind of blacklisted, and I'm finding that I have to take work when I've got it. So I've had 3 days work, which I've had to take. And for the other comrades in the meeting, that means I won't be able to print out leaflets for tomorrow because I've got another day's work for tomorrow. So please get them done some other way. And I knew I said I would do that, and I do apologize. But the subject of the meeting is anti-fascism. I'll just give you a little bit of a background from myself. I grew up in the occupied 6 counties in Derry. And I think my anti-fascism was practical because we were treated as second-class citizens. And although it wasn't exactly a fascist state, it was an authoritarian state. And I grew up always disliking anybody that oppressed anybody, and especially on grounds of race, religion, or sexuality, or anything else. So that was my kind of background. When I came to England, I got involved in organisations, first the Anti-Nazi League, and then an organisation called Anti-Fascist Action, which was far more militant and would physically and ideologically fight fascism on the streets. And I found that to be far more effective. So obviously, when we're getting on in years, there are different roles people can play in anti-fascism. But I think that Hitler himself said that the only way that the Nazis could have been defeated is if their enemies crushed them in their infancy, before they got off the ground, before they had the ability to organise the funding and the street army of the SA and the other paramilitary forces, and then eventually take over the state. So I think in a lot of ways we're kind of in that position now in Britain, and indeed all over Europe and all over the world. We've got the competition for resources. We've got the ruling classes in capitalism taking more and more of the GDP of each country, it's actually, you know, it's sickening now when you look at the billionaires and the money that they have. You know, some people, I think it's five or six billionaires have as much money as half the world's population, and that is a crazy system. So when we talk about anti-fascism, we always have to relate it back to capitalism, because Bertolt Brecht said, you know, when they defeated fascism temporarily, the beast is dead. The beast is dead, but the sow is pregnant, which means you're always going to have fascism where you've got capitalism, because it inevitably will breed resistance. Workers will resist, then the capitalists will turn, or a section of the capitalists will turn to fascism in order to smash the workers' movement. So that's my kind of ideological framework of fascism. Now, what are we facing today here in Britain? I think you know, it used to be quite sort of straightforward in a way. In the 80s, the fascists hated everybody. They hated the Jews, they hated the Muslims, they hated black people, Asian people. But they never actually singled out the Muslims in particular. Then something changed in the late 90s. The BNP were on the sort of crest of the wave with this thing. They started attacking Islam, which I think was, you know, part of the reaction against the Iraq War. Muslim people became more prominent in demonstrations and organizing. So the BNP and indeed the far right all over Europe began to target Islam and Muslim people. And incredibly, I mean, some even admitted neo-Nazis are now collaborating with Zionist groups and are sort of standing there underneath Israeli flags. And it's kind of baffling, but this is the reality. They've switched entirely, a lot of them. You will get some who still hate Jews, but I think that they're quite happy to see the Jews go to Israel, which was sort of the original anti-Semitism all over Europe, rather than be here. The people that they hate here are now the Muslims. So we're in a situation where in Newham, where I live, the far right haven't really got a foothold. In London, they haven't got much of a foothold outside of some parts of sort of Essex and some parts of southeast London. The BNP, or sorry, the EDL and groups like that wouldn't really have much of a foothold just because of the ethnocentricity of much of that area. The ethnic makeup of that area wouldn't allow them a foothold. But what we do have is areas of white flight in Essex in particular. And as further north you go in the country, you do get areas where there aren't a lot of black people, aren't a lot of Asian people. And that is the sort of breeding ground for these far right thugs. But how does this situation come about? How has it come about? We've seen these kind of pogroms up and down the country in the past month or so. And I think it's there are two things for this. First, the mainstream of capitalism has been pushed to the right. Pressure groups, far right pressure groups, have moved the whole agenda to the right. Then we've got people like the GB Newses, the Talk TVs, the LBCs to an extent, who are continually pumping this narrative about immigrants coming and getting favourable treatment here. And that is even filtering through to the north of Ireland. About a few weeks ago, I was over there on a anti-fascist protest in Belfast, where I was absolutely astounded that people from Dublin were up standing under a tricolour with loyalist murderers who'd murdered Catholics in a sectarian way. And I was actually shocked. I don't think those people will be coming back in a hurry, because they got short shrift when they tried to walk through Republican areas. They were battered when they tried to walk through Republican areas. But nevertheless, it's very disturbing that we have bigots, and you know, during the national liberation struggle in Ireland, if people felt that way, then they didn't express it. Then if they had racist views, they didn't express it. But now that the national liberation struggle is in the doldrums, we have these far right groups coming out, and it was always there. We had the blue shirts in Ireland, and they're coming out again. And I think if you look back at the funding of all these people, I think Loki's done a very good article in it. It's all coming through the evangelical movement in America, which is getting a lot of its funds from Israel. And the EDL had links with the Jewish Defense League, which is an illegal organization. So the Zionists, both Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists, are promoting right-wing politics in Britain and in Europe. You know, they've got links with these people. Even in Hungary, you've got, you know, someone with an anti-Semitic track record being lauded by Netanyahu. So the whole situation is very muddled and very confused. But I suppose if we look through sort of religious biases and that, it's a left-right struggle. It is a left-right struggle. And whoever the people that are being oppressed are, we've got to stand by them as socialist trade unionists and anti-fascists. And what form will that resistance take? Well, for me, it's got to be physical resistance where necessary, ideological resistance where necessary. But the main thing is, that's kind of, I think, sometimes neglected. We've got to challenge the capitalist system itself. We've got to say to people, look, this system isn't meant to be fair. This system is meant to discriminate against working class people, no matter what color or religion you are. How is it possible that 0.1% of the population can survive hoarding half the world's riches, other than they set people against each other on grounds of race, on grounds of religion, on grounds of ethnicity, on grounds of sex or sexuality? And that's the argument I think that we always have to push. Now, back to Newham, where I'm living, and sorry if I'm rambling, but I'm kind of rushed into this meeting. One of the reactions has been, and I think even nationally, one of the reactions has been and it's understandable, to set up like Muslim alternatives to the Labour Party. And I think although that is understandable, I think it's absolutely wrong. I think we do not want to go down the road of religion dictating politics. We don't want to go down the road of the Modi camp in India, or other places like the north of Ireland, where we had religion as an excuse to divide workers. So I think we have to come up with a strategy of taking that on. And it's not always easy to take it on. Liberals won't take it on. Liberals will not say, I don't think this is a way forward. I don't think communal politics is a way forward. Liberals will probably just fall in behind whoever's leading the charge, like Mr. Galloway. You know, I think some of the stuff he's come out with has been absolutely appalling. His attack on Romanians and, playing up the Bengali community, but at the same time playing up the worst elements in the white working class by criticizing Romanians and asylum seekers, has to be exposed. And that's going to be difficult, because people like Galloway have got finance and they have got the ear of people. And some of their politics is very good, like the stuff on Gaza and Palestine is very good. But there are other parts which need to be challenged. So I think, in a nutshell, what we can do is challenge fascism ideologically. That means challenging capitalism as well. I think we need to challenge it physically, and we need to present a credible alternative that actually challenges the capitalist system and gives working class people an alternative that is credible and that they can be a part of and empowering. Because what working class people do not want is someone turning up on their doorstep, some student turning up on their doorstep, waving a hammer and sickle and saying, you need to do this. Some student probably from a very privileged background. So I think the workers' movement has to be taking the lead in this. And I see building a working class party going in lockstep with tackling the far right and fascism. So I think that's it. That's the end of my contribution.
Thank you, Steve, for a valuable and informative contribution. I just comment briefly on that march in Belfast, which brought the Loyalists and Republican so-called groups together. There was a protest about a couple of miles from where I'm talking to you now, where a bunch of right-wing people organised an occupation of a factory which was to be converted into an asylum seeker centre. And the local right-wing had a big banner called Kuluk, which is the name of the area. Kuluk says no. So when we watched the BBC that night, there's a big banner saying Curragh says no, and behind it a big load of people waving Union Jacks. That's created havoc in the local community now. It's caused splits. People are proud of their area of Curragh, and the last thing they wanted was to see it in the middle of a loyalist or right-wing demonstration up in Belfast. It's created havoc. But anyway, in the remaining time, if comrades want to ask any questions of Steve, feel free to do so. I want to develop any of the points that Steve has made. We'll try to finish the meeting at 6 o'clock if we can. So which is our normal practice. So if comrades want to ask Steve questions, this will be the opportunity to do so.
That's fantastic. I got away very easily.
Well, most of the discussion happened before you arrived, Steve, unfortunately. But anyway, there may be questions comrades want to raise.
John and Dominic's got the hand up, Finn.
Yeah, sorry, John and
You've
Dominic.
seen them, yeah.
Yes. John or Dominic?
Dominic, it's just a couple of points.
Dominic.
I think one, as Jimmy was talking about the intervention of the courts and the police and all that, I think the one thing you've got to understand is the history of capitalist legislation against fascists has always been used against anti-fascists. That's the whole history of the struggle against Mosley, where it was used against the left, at that time. And that's what's going to happen in the future in this country. And another thing's to go back to the question you raised, Finn, about perspectives. I think that the situation in Britain is very, very difficult to indicate what the perspectives are going to be, in the sense of, here's a clear road, this is what's going to be the general run of things. Because in the past, Labour governments, and we've said this even before they were elected, have come to power on a programme of reform and have gone out on a programme of anti-reform. The Starmer government has come into a programme, the previously it ended up in austerity, and Starmer has come in on a clear programme of austerity. He couldn't have written it in larger print. The two things that happened, as John referred to a bit ago, one was the fact that there's serious child poverty in Britain, as I think there most likely is throughout the Western world, of the more advanced capitalist countries. And children in this country are going to bed without food, and that's happening to millions of children. One of the solutions that was on the cards was that at the present time, the first two children in a family get benefits from the state to finance them. There was reforms proposed to extend that to all children within a family, because it's reckoned that would really make a major indent into child poverty. Starmer totally objected to that. 6 Labour MPs or 7 voted against or voted for that policy, and they were suspended. Basically, they've been banned from the Labour Party for 6 months for that. The next one that's coming up is the fact that pensioners used to get £200 within their home for a winter fuel allowance. That's to be abolished. That's to settle the crisis that the Tories have left behind, that's going to be paid for by pensioners, who pensions in this country are nothing like they are in the rest of Europe, the advanced states in Europe. So if that's the start of it, what's the finish going to be? Because that's really already stirring Labour MPs, and considering that the Labour MPs are extremely right-wing, as we saw under Corbyn's efforts to run a government. So it's really going to be a situation where the question of a new party of Labour in this country is going to be the fact that there isn't going to be a party of Labour in this country, in my opinion, by the time Starmer's finished. And I think you're going to see a very fragmented and very split situation. The future for a Labour government, given the massive majority it's got at the present time, would seem to be unchallengeable. But given the fact that it got in on a minority vote of something like 30-odd%, that's going to disappear. And the whole situation, in my opinion, is going to be one of fragmentation and splits and all the rest of that going on. There's no clear situation appearing to me apart from one of chaos. And it's in that situation that the trade union movement has got a real serious job to do. And I think part of our actions and propaganda has got to be to raise the question of a fight in trade union organisations in this country defending working class rights and the rights of people, working class people generally.
Thank you, Dominic. I should say again, we appreciate the fact that Steve came here to our discussion, given the difficulty, the work situation that he was dealing with. So we appreciate the fact you're here, Steve, and we welcome your contribution, even though it's a bit rushed at the end, but we welcome the fact that you're here, and we hope to see you at future meetings.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll get along. Yeah.
Does somebody else want to speak? Or do you want to say something further, Steve?
No, not really. I just think that on the last contribution, I think that the trade union movement isn't fit for purpose in this country. I think that they won't mobilise people on the streets. They fail to even do that over Gaza. I think we've got the RMT, you've got members serving in the Red Sea, you've got the GMB and Unite making bombs and components for bombs and drones and everything else, and we've got the civil service union leadership refusing to ballot the members. They sign off waivers that they can't send things out of the country. So I think the trade union movement just needs a period of renewal, because the bureaucrats are going to do nothing. And I think if we're going to, I doubt anybody here's got any faith in the union bureaucracy, but it'll take a fight. You have to get through those bureaucrats to actually get at the Labour Party and get at the ruling class, because they are there as their loyal lieutenants.
Thank you, Steve. Before we draw the meeting towards a conclusion, I want to thank all the comrades. Quite a wide range of comrades spoke in well-thought-out contributions, and the points were well developed, and it's been an excellent meeting in terms of its content and what comrades have said. Our meeting next week is in Ireland. You're welcome to attend. We hope we'll see you at that meeting, Steve, and the other comrades. Does some comrade want to speak a bit more about the meeting? Tommy McKierney is going to speak on the topic. Jimmy, had you prepared to tell us a bit about the meeting?
Yeah, well, effectively, it follows on some degree from what Steve and John and Dominic were talking about earlier. The transformation in Northern Ireland, the expectations. Northern Ireland is more or less at a bit of a crossroad in that there has been the development of the rise of Sinn Féin in political terms, and a certain amount of fragmentation, disintegration among the unionist parties. Has been the rise or the appearance of the hard right on the streets, and the challenges that come out of that. Now, Tommy McKierney is a rather special person in that Tommy comes from a family that have been a Republican background. Tommy himself was involved in the IRA and was a prisoner for some time, and in fact, he was the leader of the first hunger strike, the one before the one that Bobby Sands died in. He had family members assassinated, and his brother died in action. Tommy has more or less come to the conclusion that the Republican way is not the solution, and Tommy has moved to a left position and supports the building of working class organisations and the unity of workers across the sectarian divides. More recently, he's been involved with people around with a Communist Party background, although Tommy is not a member of the Communist Party himself. He brings an awful lot of understanding, a lot of experience, and a lot of knowledge of the groups and parties and the individuals who are going to be influential on the decision-making process in the North. and we're actually privileged that he's going to attend and share with us that knowledge.
Thank you, Jimmy. So their topics we'll be covering next week in our discussion, and hopefully all of you can attend. And we'll hope you'll be there, Steve. So
sorry, just one final thing in relation to Tommy. He's been involved with building an organisation, the Workers Independent Workers Union, which is a trade union outside of Congress, Congress trade unions, and outside of the USA. They played an independent role. Some of the role has been great, some of it has been critical, but nonetheless, Tommy's role, I would believe, to be an honest role in it, and perhaps we'll hear a bit of an explanation of what's going on there as well.
yeah, there'll be a very wide-ranging discussion about Ireland next week, and Congress can think about it before the meeting. If there's nothing else, if Congress want to add something before we conclude the meeting, organizational points, whatever. If not, we'll draw the meeting to an end. Thanking you all again for your attendance, and hope to see you all next Sunday, 4 o'clock. Okay, comrades. Slán a goibh go leor.
Agus tú féin.
That's an Irish phrase.